Hey everyone, give you all a second to put your headphones on. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. I'm not too loud, I'm not too quiet, good. It's weird not being able to hear yourself. I had to catch myself from just humming to myself in case you could all hear me while I was waiting. Thank you for coming along to the session today. My name is James. I'm the CTO of a company called Cynozure. Very quickly on us, we're a people-powered data and analytics strategy consultancy. We help people on the end-to-end journey of delivering data, from writing strategies through to designing and architecting platforms, building teams, putting in governance, you name it. Myself, I come from an engineering background, solution architecture, and as CTO, I work with a lot of our customers on things like designing platforms, picking the right architectural approaches, selecting technologies, and one of the things we're going to be talking about today is all of that new terminology that's out there in the market and how hard it can be to navigate and understand. So thank you for coming along to this session. I'm normally a very comfortable public speaker with these things, but my one worry is always that nobody will show up to the event, so you've all done your good deed to the day. So jumping in, and I'm sure if you've been here for the day, you can probably pick out a huge number of these terms that you've seen on people's stands out there. And these are just a few of the things floating around the market at the moment, some of them new, some of them old. And they can be really obtuse sometimes to try and figure out. I spend a lot of time, I live and breathe this stuff every day, and I spend a huge amount of time trying to understand what some of these things mean, why they're different. Lots of these get invented by vendors or consultancies, people trying to create a niche, create a new market, position their brand. Some emerge out of genuine practice and need and come from a sort of bottom-up approach, and all of them eventually make their way into our world, where we're left going, should I be worrying about this? Is this something I should be doing? What does this actually mean for me? Lots of things we're going to dig into today. You're probably going to go, I think I'm already doing that, or that sounds exactly like this. And I'm going to try and draw out and tease out those differences as we go through and try and see where there's subtle differences. Also, as we explore some of the topics today, I'm going to be approaching them from the purest concept point of view. So this isn't about the tech vendors, what they're trying to sell. This is, okay, well, what is this idea really about? What problem is it trying to solve? What does it mean? Because then there's a gap to what vendors actually implement. And I'm sure, again, if you've walked around and spent any time talking to vendors or in sessions, you'll have seen data mesh, the topic of this year, if you like. Tons of them are probably positioning themselves as, we're this thing for data mesh. And it's like, well, are you? You're not doing everything that data mesh as an idea and as a concept says that you need to do. You've picked a bit of it, you've tried to align your brand, and that could just make it even more complicated to try and work through some of these ideas. I'm going to try then and keep these as simple as possible as I try and describe them. We're going to explore these four specific terms today: active metadata, metrics layer, data observability, and reverse ETL. Some of these are a bit newer, some of these are older. And in fact, as we go through, I'm going to poll you guys just to get a feel for which of these you have heard of or could describe going into this. We're going to look at it through the lens of customers, because we should be customer first in everything that we do. That's what I've always been taught. So I'm going to try and frame it around some problems that real people we would all work with, real customers of our data platform, users and so on, would face and how they would experience it. So, from a CEO whose report is broken, from a CDO who's trying to manage data, a marketing director who's trying to activate and use their data in campaigns, and a head of sales who can't get the right number for how much we've sold last year. And of course, they're all really sad and upset and unhappy with their situation. So we're going to look at how those four terms I explored try to fix some of those problems, where they're coming from in there. So our first one, we're going to look at our CEO. So if anyone's experienced this before in an organization, it's not much fun to be told by your CEO or some other senior manager that your report is broken or the number's wrong and you're the head of data or whatever, and you're finding out by effectively a customer, an important customer, telling you this isn't right. And we all know the impacts that kind of stuff has. It damages trust in the data, makes people go off and try and do their own things because they don't believe what you're doing is working properly. It causes a load of hassle and headache. So the first topic we're going to explore, based around this one, is data observability. Now I'm going to start by trying to define data observability for you, but in a second we'll look at that in the context of what most of us are probably doing today and try and pull out why it's different, or at least why the market would tell us it's different. So, like many things in data observability has come from the software engineering world. If anyone's familiar with that practice, you have observability in data, which is very much focused on the health of IT infrastructure and trying to understand holistically across all of your applications, your networks, your systems. Are they good? Are they up? What's wrong? How are they behaving? And so on. Data observability then takes that same concept and applies it to data, looking at data health in the pipelines. Now, in practice, if you're implementing this stuff, you need both. You need to know your platforms are up and running and your tools are working okay, but you also need to understand how healthy is the data. And I like thinking of it as data health because, kind of like the human body, I want to look at the big picture, not just a single organ or whatever in there, in order to understand, am I okay? And symptoms pop up in different places. You know, my skin goes yellow if I'm jaundiced, that's a liver problem. So I need to look at the big picture to actually understand where the real problem's coming from. Data observability is really just focused on how do you stop data downtime. So reports being wrong, broken, missing data, not available, you name it, those kind of problems. It's how do we proactively and preventatively manage that. And it's trying to look at across the whole stack as well and tie together all of the different bits that make up our end-to-end environment for data cohesively together. Now, the 5 terms on screen, they're the ones that most of the vendors, and I believe it comes from Monte Carlo originally, if you've checked that out, they're a big player in this space. They're the main topics that tend to get presented and positioned by vendors. So we've got freshness. Is my data up to date for when I would expect it to? Maybe is that daily, minutely, hourly, whatever it is. Is the data fresh and up to date? Distribution. Are my values in the right range that I would expect? I haven't suddenly got 10 trillion customers because that couldn't be possible. We've got volume. Have I got the right number of rows and records? I know from past experience this one can be a real headache. I used to work at Marks & Spencer on the big data team, and we used to do some monitoring, obviously, in our platform. And one of the things we used to check was trying to compare volumes over days. And trying to measure .com transactions was like, there's a sale, so we've had 10 million transactions. And then the next day, nobody's buying anything because they all bought it yesterday. And my system was constantly telling me, there's a problem. And it's just like, no, it's just .com's really annoyingly uneven in how it sales. Schema, so if we've got changes in our schemas, our structures of data at any layers in there. And lineage, and I think that's probably the most interesting one, looking across my end-to-end connections where stuff is flowing, are any points breaking, changing, and how are they interconnected as well, so I can start to understand, if this thing breaks here, here's a downstream impact that I'm going to feel later on. So those are the kind of data points that data observability focuses on. Now, you can't just look at those things, so while that's the sort of leading message, when you start to dig into it, it also talks about you need to measure your jobs, your pipelines. Are they running on time? Are they starting and completing when I'd expect? Are they performing well? All those kind of more technical aspects of it as well. I find it easiest to think about these things often in terms of what most of us are probably doing today. So all the people I've spoken to about data observability kind of go to me, well, it's just monitoring, isn't it? Like, that's just, we're all doing that today. I just gave you an example from a previous role where I measured data flowing through my platform. You could also look at it and say, oh, these are sort of data quality metrics as well, aren't they? How are they distinguishing? And this is where you get a real overlap in lots of different things. These aren't necessarily neat, discrete, self-contained concepts. And we'll look at active metadata next, and you'll see that took me a while just to get my head around really where the overlap was and wasn't between those two things. So thinking about it in terms of, well, what do we do today? Again, this is how the industry is positioning this stuff right now. So you can make up your own minds whether you agree or disagree with this positioning. And in reality, you might find the way you're implementing it somewhat blends the two together. So monitoring is, in theory, I look at a specific system. So I'm looking at one contained thing. I might just be looking at logs for the database. I might just be looking at the logs for a specific data pipeline. I'm not looking at them in a joined up fashion. It's also predetermined. So I decide there are some specific things I'm going to measure, times, volumes, and so on. And I go and I have to kind of code those and build those to make sure I'm monitoring and measuring those specific things. And it's that narrow focus of I only can look at that kind of small world, whereas data observability is trying to say, actually, I want to look at the bigger picture. I want to try and understand how all this stuff joins together, how the overall health is looking. I want to look end to end. I don't want to think about each bit in isolation. I want to understand how they're connected and how they're impacting each other. I want to understand the relationships between things so that when something breaks over here, I understand the cadence and interconnectivity of stuff that's going to break downstream. Most implementations I see of this stuff, people are already moving heavily towards a lot of the concepts and thinking that is data observability. And again, this comes back to a lot of this stuff is just about positioning it. It's a way for vendors to package up and market their tool sets in there. So if you're thinking, well, I do a lot of that stuff already, you probably do. You're maybe just not calling it data observability. So out of interest, just a quick show of hands, not who just heard of data observability, but who was able to sort of, I guess, define data observability prior to this session? Was anyone kind of knew exactly what it was? Go. Couple of hands, not many. And I think this is probably one of the more mature topics that we're exploring today in terms of the availability of tool sets out there and where they focus. So talking and thinking back to our CEO who's had a broken experience, a proper data observability implementation should give my data team the ability to capture and detect problems early, to notify users automatically, to tell them, hang on, there's something broken, and to make sure it's not the CEO who's ringing me up and saying, where the hell is my report this morning? It's me coming and proactively dealing with it. So our next problem person, our CDO, they want to manage customer data, and it keeps slipping through the gaps in their platform. They're not securing it properly, it's not being masked or hashed, it's not being properly access controlled, you name it, and it's getting into the platform through the seams. People uploading stuff, people ingesting new sources and not properly recognizing that in there. So, and this is really just one example of the topic of active metadata. I'm going to give you some more use cases in a moment to talk about, but there are two main things that help me get my head around what active metadata is. So if today's metadata is things like data catalogs, just standard, what we've all been doing for quite a long time, active metadata is the next gen of that, and you'll see a lot of the traditional metadata players, data management players, will now be talking about active metadata when they position their catalog. So if you think about it first as passive is what we do today. We collect metadata and we put it in a system, and if you want to know about it, you have to go to that system to get it out. I want to understand the structure of a table. I want to know what a column means. I go to Calibra, Atacama, whatever, and I open it up and I search and I find the thing and I read the description. I go, okay, I know what that thing is now. That's passive. So we're moving to active, where instead of you going to the metadata is coming to you, whether you're a person, you're a system, or so on. So it recognizes there's been a change in the structure of some data. It's going to alert you. Maybe it's telling a downstream system there is a change to the structure of the data. This is where some of the data observability overlap comes in as well. A data quality score might be a piece of metadata. The freshness that we just talked about, that's a piece of metadata. And treated in an active way, I'm telling people about the freshness of it. I'm exposing it in BI reports. I'm sending out in alerts if their freshness is not good and warning people. So active is literally that. It is going out, it's integrating, it's talking to other systems and people. The other side of it, which I've sort of already alluded to, is that today's metadata, generally speaking, is technical. We document tables, structures, files, locations, data types, definitions of columns, and shapes of schemas, and so on. It's very focused on what have I got and where is it in my system and in my platform. Active metadata is trying to broaden out the metadata we care about and we capture and we use. So it still cares about all that stuff. That's not going away. It's obviously important and it's there for a reason. But it's also thinking about, and these are the sort of 4 categories, most vendors, and if you read any blogs, are going to focus around. You've got operational, which is about how does this fit into a pipeline, an ETL flow, and so on. We've got business, which is business context. What's the tags, the classification, who's the owner for this, which business processes does this sit with, which team does this belong to, and so on. And we've got social, which is about sort of usage, who's accessing this data, how often, who are they sharing it with, what additional knowledge are they able to add and enrich around that they can share with the organization. So it's trying to broaden out the range of metadata we're capturing so that all of those things can be used for good stuff. So, for example, we might want to purge unused assets from our system. We've got metadata that is telling us who is querying and access data sets in our platform, reports in our platform, what have you. And it says nobody's used it for 120 days. So because I'm active, I'm going to go and delete that. I'm going to take that action myself. It's not just for someone to go in and look at. I've got a routine driven by that metadata. It is allocating compute resources. We understand that there's a burst in demand at this point in time of users logging in on Monday morning to check the sales reports. How do we make sure that our system ramps up and scales appropriately at the right time? It is enriching BI tools. So instead of me having to go to the data, how do I enrich my BI tool and present that data and share it really easily? So there's a whole load of different use cases that active metadata can enable. And metadata is one of those things that metadata is just a different data set you hold there. So loads of these read and sound like automation within our platform. And again, if you're finding yourself sitting there saying, yeah, I'm doing some of this already, I imagine that you almost certainly are. But you're going to hear a lot more about this if you're getting into the data management space. This is the new nomenclature for metadata management tools. So again, quick show of hands. Did anyone come across active metadata before today? Yeah, again, only a few going up. So our next one, our marketing director. Sorry, I lie. I've got another slide. It's like one behind here. The other 4 things that we're centering around active metadata from an industry definition point of view are that it's always on. So it's not scheduled, go and get it. It's constant, searching, cataloging, updating in real time, always, always, always going. It's intelligent, so it's joining the dots. It's trying to tell us some of the why about what's going on, some of the relationships, some of the interconnectivity. It's action-orientated, so instead of just being there, it's driving alerts, notifications, direct access, like I'm going to switch off this job or delete this data or whatever it is. And it's API enabled, so it's open. Our systems should be able to talk to our metadata tool, consume that data, whether through APIs, through streams, or whatever. And the way this kind of thing can help our CDO is that we can be constantly looking at our environment, classifying data, recognizing that that's a bit of PII data that hasn't been secured properly, and taking action to deal with that. Secure it, mask it, whatever it is. So we can talk about our marketing director. We've done some great analysis as a data team, done a wonderful segmentation of customers that is brilliant, and our marketing director wants to go get it out, but they can't get it into the system quick enough, and we missed the opportunity to run the campaign because the window of time where it was relevant has passed and we couldn't react and respond quick enough. So this is where reverse ETL comes in. I had this on a panel I was on earlier, with the panel chair saying, that's one of their least favorite buzzwords. And I think that's one of the really important thing with all these buzzwords. Get beneath it, look at what it's actually trying to do. And many of them are actually trying to solve a genuine problem. And the buzzword is a marketing ploy. It's a way of branding and communicating to people what we do. So reverse ETL, I think, is the simplest of these concepts. It is ETL. It's taking data from one system and it's putting it in the other. The reason it's reverse is it's because it's leaving our data platform rather than entering it and going back into our operational systems, the same place where we potentially took some of that data from originally. So it is providing a segmentation for a customer and putting it into our marketing tool. It is predicting a forecast and putting it into our finance tool and so on. The big thing, and the reason we're seeing a resurgence of this topic at the moment, and it's one that is getting more and more talked about this year and is going to be increasingly talked about next year, is that businesses have matured enough to understand that data is more than just a report that you need to look at. And tools like Fivetran and Stitch and so on have introduced people to the concept of simple connectors to plug into systems. We now have those connectors that work the other way, so it makes it, I don't have to build something. It's really easy for me to push that data out back into my operational system. So reverse ETL, same question again. This one I would think most people have probably heard of, but show of hands quickly. A few more this time. I think you're going to hear a lot more about this one this year, especially as some of those big vendors like Fivetran, I'm expecting to pivot into this space to enrich their existing offerings. So the last one, and this is the most complicated, the one that's taken me the longest to get my head round, and the one I think is probably going to be the most important trend for the next, this is maybe like 2 years or more looking ahead, is the metrics layer. So this problem, I'm sure everyone's experienced. Your head of sales keeps being given conflicting numbers for the same things. You know, how many customers do we have? Well, our marketing team thinks we've got 1 million. Our sales team thinks we've got 900,000. These guys in ops thinks we've got 2 million. Why the hell can't we all agree on the same number? Enter the metrics layer. Now, here's the problem view that we have right now. And there's multiple versions of this image online, and I think this is the easiest way to understand it. We've seen an explosion of tools because it's become cheaper and easier than ever to spin up software. I think we saw a particular explosion over COVID as everyone got driven to remote working, and I saw a lot of people invest in doing data and trying to understand their business better. So they bought Power BI, they bought Tableau, they started doing SQL, they hired analysts, and you had loads of different ways people were starting to come in and access data and answer questions. And what that meant is that metric logic, how do I count customers, how do I count, sum up sales, whatever it is, got written and embedded in the BI tools themselves. And inevitably, that meant you got some different definitions. They might have all started off at the same, but they change, the definitions change, and it doesn't stay consistent over time. So you get this problem where none of my tools say the same thing anymore, and it's impossible to tell which one's right. Now, this isn't just a technology problem. That's sort of true of everything I've told you today, and I'm not focusing on that sort of part of this, but all of this stuff needs good governance, good control, good architecture, and so on around it, as much as it needs good tools to manage it all. I've seen a few tools now starting to jump on this, and the one that excites me the most is dbt. They've got their, I think, beta now out of the metrics layer. They're putting a lot of time and energy into investing in that, and I think theirs is the one to watch as to what this can potentially be. But where we've got this problem, we're trying to move to this. All of my tools don't have the logic anymore. I have a layer where all of that logic lives. The thing that I really struggled to get my head around with this is like, well, why is that not just me defining the logic in my data warehouse? That's what I do with most of my customers, right? I say, don't put as little logic as you can later on in the process, push as much of it back into your central ETL processes, put it into your tables, your fact tables, whatever you want to call them, because then they're in one place and everyone can go there. And I was really stuck on that with the metrics. So I was like, especially as I've done this stuff long enough to see things like business objects universes. And if you've been doing data warehouses for a while, this sounds an awful lot like analysis services cubes and business objects and MicroStrategy and all these old things that sort of is the same thing. And it was easier because in that world, you had a much more limited stack of technology, so you were kind of controlled through there. But the big important difference, the thing that helped me get my head around this was, with the metrics layer, I'm centrally defining my metric definition. And when someone wants to know a metric, they go there. But they also go there if they want to aggregate it and filter it and cut it by multiple different things. And they don't write the logic to do that. They don't write the group by statement and the sum. And they don't pick whether it's a sum or a distinct count or an average or whatever they can do to it. They just talk to it through APIs, through JDBC drivers, through all kinds of connections, and tell it what it's after. I like to think of it as, if anyone works in a technical team, it's like when the old way is customers coming to you with the solution, not the problem. And they say, I want to do this. That's someone writing a query and saying, give me this. What we want them to do is come to us with the problem, and we'll give them the solution. In this case, they're coming to us with the problem and saying, I'd like to count customers by region for last year, and I want to exclude this stuff. There's no way in a data warehouse I can pre-aggregate and build every single combination of metric, cut by every dimension, every filter, or whatever, that people want to see. Inevitably, someone will have to write a query to do some stuff. And that means if they don't know the perfect business logic they're supposed to apply to it to do that, then there's a good chance at some point mistakes are going to be made and things are going to diverge. So this moves away and says, you don't write the query, you tell us what you're after, we'll create the query, we'll programmatically write the SQL for you in the metrics layer, go and get you the data and send it back for you to use. Where it also differs from things like if you've come across universes, analysis services, cubes, it's interoperable, so any tool should be able to connect to this layer. It's not about a specific thing, it's supposed to be universal. And it's supposed to be configuration driven, so metrics would be defined in things like a YAML file or something if you're familiar with that, but rather than as code, you're trying to describe your metric in a configurable way that can evolve as you go. So there's a whole lot, again, of governance and control needed around that, about who gets to decide what a metric is and how do we version control that and so on. So I think this is really exciting. And the bit that really made me feel like this was big was one of the co-founders of DBT wrote an article on this after they'd got some funding earlier this year, last year. And they drew a picture of a modern data platform and said, this is the modern data platform, and it had like 4 boxes on it: ingest, store, process, something like that. And they drew a 5th box on it that said the metrics layer. This is going to be the next thing in the platform. This is where we see it going. And it's solving a genuine problem. It's tied up in some other terms out there, so things like headless BI, haven't quite wrapped my head around that one as to whether that's the same. It overlaps an awful lot, but it's trying to bring some different things in there. Metrics store as well. Well, as far as I can tell, the metrics store is really the metrics layer. It's just a different language. So this is still by far the most immature of the topics, the one that's still the most emerging, the one that definitely the technology solutions are the lightest, the weakest, the most ill-formed at this point. But I also think it's probably the most exciting ones coming along that actually might genuinely solve what has been a long-standing problem of this. I can't get the same numbers. So finally, our sad sales director will be able to get consistent numbers from everyone because we're driving it all through a consistent layer. So that about wraps us up. Hopefully, you've taken away a couple of things from today. One is you at least have a starting point for what all of those 4 terms mean and how they're defined. And I would say you should definitely treat this as a jumping off point, and you should definitely not treat what I've told you as gospel, because there's plenty of opinion and variation around these topics. And the other is that while buzzwords can be hard to approach, they are often hiding a real solution to a real problem that once you get into it, there's actually genuine value hiding there. Hopefully you've enjoyed the talk. If you've got any questions, if you want to talk about any of those or any of the other words up on the screen or anything at all, you can come by, see me. I'll be at stand 628 with a bunch of my wonderful colleagues as well, which is sort of just down this side, about halfway down. You'll also see around we're running a data strategy scorecard with Big Data London, QR code if you want to scan it. Quick survey, asks you some questions, scores you against pillars of a data strategy. It will give you your result and some recommendations on things you could be doing. We'll also be collating and sharing around at the end of the conference sort of aggregated view of everyone's scores, so you can see how you benchmark and baseline against everyone else at the conference. That's everything. I'll put that back up just in case anyone's still scanning. Thank you very much for coming along, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.